Welcome to the channel Hidden Coin Value. What if the change in your pocket could secretly make you a millionaire overnight? Well, maybe not a millionaire. But what if it could pay off your car, cover a semester of tuition, or fund a vacation you've been putting off for years? Today we're talking about a coin so common, so overlooked, so ordinary looking, that most people wouldn't even bend down to pick it up off the sidewalk. And that coin is the 1998 Washington quarter. Stick with me here, because by the end of this video, you are never going to look at a quarter the same way again. Now before we go any further, I want you to picture something. Picture an old coffee can sitting in the back of a garage. Picture a rusted cigar box tucked away in a grandparent's dresser drawer. Picture a forgotten roll of quarters from the bank, still wrapped in paper, sitting untouched for almost 30 years. Somewhere, in one of those places, in one of those dusty containers, there is a 1998 quarter that is not worth 25 cents. It's worth thousands. And in the most extreme, jaw-dropping cases documented by major grading services, certain specimens have crossed into the five-figure range at auction. Let that sink in for a second. A coin that vending machines accept without hesitation. A coin that gets shoved into parking meters, tossed into tip jars, and left in couch cushions. And yet, under the right conditions, with the right error, in the right grade, this coin has sold for more than some people make in an entire year. So how does a quarter, a coin the US Mint stamped out by the billions, become something collectors are willing to fight over at auction? That's exactly what we're diving into today. And I promise you, by the time we're done, you're going to want to run to your junk drawer and start digging. Before we get into the value, I want to give you a quick reminder, because this isn't the only coin in today's video. We've got two more coins coming up after this one, and I'll tell you right now, the story only gets crazier from here. One of the coins we're covering today has a background so bizarre that even seasoned coin dealers have argued about it. And the final coin in today's lineup? Let's just say I'm saving the biggest reveal for last. So don't go anywhere. Stick around till the very end. Alright. Let's get into the 1998 Washington quarter. First, some background. 1998 was a significant year for the Washington Quarter series, because it was the final year of the classic, unchanging quarter reverse, the eagle design that had been used, with only minor tweaks, since 1932. Starting in 1999, the U.S. Mint would launch the 50-state quarters program, completely transforming how Americans thought about pocket change. Suddenly, people who had never cared about coins before were checking their quarters, sorting them by state, filling up those blue Whitman folders. But right before all of that happened, in 1998, the Mint quietly produced one last run of the traditional eagle reverse quarter, and it's this transitional year that makes 1998 quarters so historically important. The Denver Mint, that's what the D Mint mark stands for, struck an enormous number of quarters that year. We're talking hundreds of millions of coins, all pressed out on high-speed coin presses, day after day, month after month. The second type of error we need to talk about with 1998 quarters is the RE punched mint mark, or RPM. Now, this is a little more historical. Mint marks used to be hand-punched onto dies before the process was automated. If the mint mark got punched slightly off-center, and then punched again in a corrected position, you'd end up with a D that looks like it's got a faint doubled outline, almost like a shadow letter sitting just behind the main one. RPMs from earlier decades are more common, but variations in transitional die mark irregularities from the late 1990s still show up, and when they do, collectors who specialize in mint mark varieties take serious notice. Then there's a category of error that gets even more visually dramatic, and that's the OFF center strike. Picture this: a blank planchet is supposed to sit perfectly centered on the coin press, between the obverse die and the reverse die, so that when the machine slams down with tons of pressure, the design gets stamped perfectly onto the coin. But sometimes, because of a mechanical hiccup, a misfeed, a piece of debris, the planchet shifts before the strike happens. The result? A coin where the design is pushed off to one side, with a crescent of blank, unstruck metal on the other side. Depending on how off-center the strike is, collectors measure this in percentages, like a 10% off-center strike or a dramatic 50% off-center strike. The coin can look almost alien. Half a Washington portrait. Half an eagle. A sliver of raw, unstamped planchet curving around the edge like a bite taken out of a cookie. These off-center strikes are incredibly popular with error collectors because they're immediately, visually obvious. You don't need a magnifying glass to know something is wrong with the coin. You can see it from across the room. Now here's the thing about all of these errors: double dies, repunched mint marks, off-center strikes. They were never supposed to leave the Denver Mint. Quality control is supposed to catch this stuff. Inspectors are supposed to pull flawed coins before they ever reach circulation. But quality control isn't perfect. It never has been. And when you're striking coins at a rate of hundreds per minute, a handful of flawed coins slipping through the cracks is basically inevitable. Those coins get bagged up with all the normal ones, shipped out to banks, handed out in change, and scattered across the entire country, completely unnoticed, hiding in plain sight, indistinguishable from a normal quarter unless you know exactly what you're looking for. That's the part that should give you chills. Somewhere out there, right now, there could be a 1998 D quarter with a dramatic off-center strike sitting in someone's spare change jar. And that person has absolutely no idea what they're holding. Now, I also want to talk about a fourth type of error that pops up in 1998 D quarters, because it's one that trips up even experienced collectors: the clipped planchet. Remember, before a coin is struck, it starts as a blank metal disc called a planchet, punched out of a long, continuous strip of coin metal. Picture that strip feeding through a machine like a giant sheet of metal moving down an assembly line, with a punch stamping out one circular blank after another. Under normal conditions, each blank comes out as a perfect circle. But if the strip doesn't advance correctly, if it shifts even slightly before the next punch comes down, the punch can overlap with the hole left by the previous blank. The result is a planchet that's missing a curved chunk, almost like someone took a bite out of the edge of the coin. When that clipped planchet gets fed into the coin press and struck with the obverse and reverse dies, you end up with a quarter that has a crescent-shaped bite missing from its edge, but with the design still perfectly struck around it. It's a bizarre, almost unsettling thing to look at when you first see one, because your brain expects a coin to be round, and this one very clearly isn't. Clipped planchet errors on 1998 D quarters are. This is where the two major third-party grading services come into play: PCGS, the professional coin grading service, and NGC, the new. And here's something a lot of casual coin owners don't realize: PCGS and NGC keep detailed population reports. These are public records showing exactly how many coins of a given date, mint mark, and grade have ever been submitted and certified. So for the 1998 D quarter, you can actually look up how many have been graded at MS65, how many at MS67, and how many, if any, have reached that ultra-rare MS68 or higher. For a coin struck in the hundreds of millions, you'd think high grades would be common. But mint state survival for coins that were meant to circulate, meant to get handled, stacked, dropped, jingled around in pockets, is actually much rarer than people assume. A coin that avoided all of that wear and tear, that somehow stayed pristine for over 25 years, is genuinely uncommon. And when an error coin also happens to survive in that kind of condition? Now you're talking about something that checks every single box collectors care about: rarity of the error, plus rarity of the grade. This is also where something called the CAC sticker comes in. That's the Certified Acceptance Corporation. CAC doesn't grade coins themselves. Instead, they review coins that have already been graded by PCGS or NGC, and they place a small green or gold sticker on the holder if they believe the coin is a particularly strong, PQ, or premium quality example for its assigned grade. A CAC sticker on a slabbed coin tells serious collectors, hey, this isn't just a 65, this is a solid 65, maybe even undergrad. Coins with CAC approval routinely sell for a premium over coins without it, because it's a second layer of expert confirmation. There's also a special category collector's chase called the PL and DPL designation, proof-like and deep proof-like. Even though the 1998 D quarter was struck for normal circulation and not intended as a proof coin, sometimes freshly polished or unusually smooth dies, especially early in a die's working life before it develops wear, can strike coins with reflective, almost mirror-like fields. When light hits a proof-like coin, the flat background areas reflect like a mirror, while the raised design elements stay frosted and matte, creating a striking contrast that almost looks like a proof coin, even though it left the mint through completely normal circulation channels. Deep proof-like takes that reflectivity even further, with fields so mirror bright that you can almost collectors chasing what's called the condition census, basically the small handful of finest known examples for a given coin, will pay serious premiums to own a coin that sits at or near the top of that list. Being top pop, meaning the highest population grade recorded by a grading service with no known coins graded higher, is basically the numismatic equivalent of owning a world record. There's only ever going to be a handful of coins that can claim that title for any given date and mint mark, and once someone else grabs the top spot, it can be gone for years, sometimes decades, before another example surfaces that can challenge it. Let's also talk for a moment about the Denver Mint itself, because understanding where these coins came from actually helps explain why errors like this happen in the first place. Error coins from the 1990s have increasingly caught fire in the collector market over the last several years. Part of that is generational. Collectors who grew up in the 80s and 90s, pulling coins out of circulation as kids, are now adults with real disposable income, and they're chasing the coins that meant something to them growing up. Part of it is also just simple math. As decades pass, more and more of these coins get spent, lost, melted down, or damaged, which shrinks the surviving population even further. A dramatic off-center 1998 D quarter, or a strongly doubled die example, particularly one that's been certified in a high mint state grade, has increasingly become the kind of coin that sparks genuine bidding wars at major coin auctions and online platforms. Prices in the thousands of dollars, sometimes well into five figures for the most extreme, best documented specimens, are not just theoretical. They've happened. Error coin specialists and registry set collectors have been documented paying serious money for the right combination of rarity, condition, and eye appeal. And that's really the magic formula, isn't it? Rarity, condition, eye appeal. A coin needs all three to command real money. A common error in a beat-up, heavily worn condition isn't going to excite anybody. But a dramatic error, something you can see with your naked eye, combined with a high grade, meaning it's somehow avoided decades of wear, combined with strong eye appeal, meaning it's just visually striking to look at, that's the combination that gets serious collectors reaching for their wallets. Let me paint you a picture of how these discoveries actually happen, because I think this is the part that really gets people excited. Imagine a woman named Diane. I'm illustrating a scenario here, the kind of story that plays out again and again in this hobby, who inherited her late father's coin collection. Mixed in with some old silver dollars and a handful of wheat pennies, buried at the bottom of a cigar box, was an unremarkable-looking roll of quarters, still wrapped in the original bank paper from the late 1990s. She almost didn't bother opening it. Why would she? It's just quarters. But something told her to check, coin by coin, against her father's handwritten notes. And there it was, a 1998 D quarter with a strike that looked off. Not damaged. Not corroded. Just wrong, in a way she couldn't quite explain. She sent photos to a local coin dealer, who took one look and told her to get it authenticated immediately. That wrong-looking quarter turned out to be a documented off-center strike error, later certified, and eventually sold to a specialist collector for a sum that completely changed her assumptions about what just a quarter could actually be worth. Now, is every 1998 D quarter in your pocket going to be worth thousands of dollars? Of course not. The overwhelming majority are just normal, so here's your. It really is that simple. No expensive equipment required. No formal training necessary. Just patience, good lighting, and a willingness to actually look closely at something most people never bother to examine at all. Before we move on, I want to remind you again, we are not done today. Not even close. Because the next coin in today's video has a story that is, honestly, even stranger than this one. I'm talking about a coin where even veteran collectors have gone back and forth about exactly how it ended up the way it did. The mystery around this next coin is part of what makes it so fascinating. So if you found this first story interesting, brace yourself, because things are about to get even more intense. And after that coin? We're saving something truly special for the grand finale of today's video. I'm not going to spoil a single detail right now, you're just going to have to stick around and see it for yourself. But I promise you, out of the 3 coins we're covering today, the final one is the one that's going to leave the biggest impression. So don't touch that dial. Don't skip ahead. One last thing before we wrap up this coin. A lot of people ask me, why would anyone pay serious money for a coin with a mistake on it? Isn't a flawed coin supposed to be worth less, not more? And I totally understand why that seems counter. This has been the story of the 1998 D Washington quarter, a coin that looks like nothing special, that most people would spend without a second thought, but that, under the right circumstances, with the right error, in the right condition, has proven itself to be far more than just 25 cents. It's a reminder that history and fortune really can hide in the most ordinary places. Keep checking your change. You never know what you might find. Next, 1993 D Washington quarter. Have you ever checked your coins carefully? Because somewhere out there, mixed in with completely ordinary pocket change, sits a coin that looks almost right, almost normal, but isn't. And the small handful of collectors who understand exactly what they're looking at have paid serious money to own one. Today we're talking about the 1993 D Washington quarter, and trust me, this story gets stranger than the last one. Before we even get into the details, I need you to understand something about 1993. This was still the golden era of the classic Washington quarter, that eagle reverse design, unchanged since the 1930s, still being churned out by the Denver Mint at a staggering pace. Nobody in 1993 was thinking about quarters as collectibles. The 50-state quarters program was still 6 years away. Coin collecting, as a hobby, was mostly seen as something for retirees and hobbyists, not something ordinary Americans paid attention to. Which means quarters from this era went into circulation, got spent, got stacked in cash registers, got dropped into laundromat machines, and nobody was examining them closely. Nobody was checking for errors. Nobody was setting aside anything unusual. Which is exactly why so many dramatic error coins from this period have remained hidden, undiscovered, and completely unnoticed for over 30 years. The highest documented values for genuinely exceptional, dramatically flawed 1993 D quarters, the kind with major, undeniable mint errors, certified in strong mint state grades, have reached deep into the thousands of dollars at auction, with the most extraordinary, best documented examples pushing into the higher 5-figure range. And before we go any further into exactly what makes this particular quarter so special, I want to remind you, we've got one more coin coming after this one today, and it is, without question, the most dramatic story in this entire video. I'm not giving you a single hint about the value yet. You're just going to have to keep watching. Okay. Let's dig into the 1993 D quarter. The first error type we need to talk about here is the die crack, sometimes also called a cud when it becomes severe enough. Here's how this works. Coin dies are made of hardened steel, and they're subjected to an absolutely brutal amount of repeated stress, tons of pressure, applied over and over again, hundreds of times per minute, hour after hour, day after day. Over time, that relentless stress causes microscopic fractures to form in the die surface. At first, these fractures are invisible, harmless, undetectable. But as striking continues, the fracture grows, spreading like a crack in a windshield, until eventually it becomes large enough to actually show up on the coins being struck. When metal flows into that crack during striking, it creates a raised, irregular line on the finished coin, a die crack. If the crack becomes severe enough that an entire piece of the die breaks away completely, the resulting defect is called a CUD, and it shows up on the coin as a raised, blob-like blank area, usually along the rim, where the design should be but simply isn't, replaced instead by a featureless mound of raised metal. Die cracks and CUDs are fascinating to collectors because they represent a kind of timeline. A die doesn't crack all at once, it develops the crack gradually, coin after coin, strike after strike. Which means you can actually track the progression of a single die's deterioration by comparing multiple coins struck from it, watching the crack grow larger and larger with each subsequent coin, right up until the die was finally pulled from service and retired. For a 1993 D quarter with a significant, well-developed CUD, especially one large enough to be immediately obvious without magnification, collectors get genuinely excited, because it's tangible, visible proof of exactly how the coin was made, and exactly what went wrong in the process. The second error worth discussing is the BROADSTRIKE. This happens when the collar, the metal ring that normally surrounds the planchet during striking and forces the coin into its correct round shape with reeded or smooth edges, fails to engage properly. Without that collar holding everything in place, the immense pressure of the strike causes the metal to spread outward beyond its normal boundaries, like squeezing a stress ball too hard and watching it bulge out between your fingers. The result is a coin that's noticeably larger in diameter than a normal quarter, often slightly irregular or wavy around the edge instead of perfectly round, with a flattened, spread-out appearance to the whole design. Broad strikes are wonderfully dramatic to look at, because even someone who has never seen an error coin before can immediately tell something is wrong. The coin just looks wrong, oversized, misshapen, off. And the third error type we're covering today, one that tends to fascinate even veteran collectors, is the rotated die error. Under normal minting conditions, the obverse die and the reverse die are aligned in a very specific, fixed orientation relative to each other. If you hold a normal US coin and flip it vertically, top to bottom, like turning the page of a book, the design on the back should line up in a predictable, standardized way. But if one of the dies becomes loose in its mounting and rotates even by just a few degrees, sometimes dramatically by 90 degrees or more, every coin struck afterward carries that same rotation. Flip a rotated die error coin the normal way, and the reverse design will appear tilted, sideways, sometimes even completely upside down compared to where it's supposed to be. It's a subtle error at first glance, the coin still looks completely normal on either side individually, but once you understand what you're looking at, and you flip the coin correctly to check the alignment, it becomes an unmistakable, documented mint error. Now, here's a story I want to share with you, the kind of scenario that plays out more often in this hobby than you might expect. Picture a man named Raymond, a retired mechanic who spent decades collecting loose change in giant water cooler jugs, the way so many of our grandparents did, just tossing spare coins in without a second thought. When he finally decided to cash them all in at a coin counting machine, something made him pause. A friend had mentioned offhandedly that older quarters were sometimes worth checking before dumping them into the machine. So instead of feeding everything straight through, Raymond spent an entire weekend sorting quarters by hand, checking dates, checking mint marks. And buried in that mountain of ordinary change was a 1993 D quarter with an unmistakable cut along the rim, a raised, blank blob where design should have been. He almost dismissed it as damage. But a local dealer confirmed it was a genuine die break error, and it eventually sold to a specialist collector for a sum that left Raymond stunned. All from a coin he nearly dumped straight into a counting machine without a second look. Let's talk grading again, because the principles that apply to our first coin apply just as strongly here, maybe even more so, given how much rarer significant errors from this specific date have proven to be. On the Sheldon scale, running from 1 to 70, a 1993 D quarter surviving in high mint state condition, MS65 and above, is already considered notable, simply because so many coins from this era were heavily circulated before anyone thought to set aside nicer examples. When you combine a high mint state grade with a dramatic, certified error, you're looking at a coin that satisfies two separate categories of rarity simultaneously, which is exactly the kind of combination that drives serious bidding wars. PCGS and NGC, the two dominant third-party grading services in the hobby, both maintain detailed population reports for coins like this, and for 1993 D quarters with confirmed major errors, submission counts remain remarkably low. This is where numismatic terminology like top pop becomes especially meaningful. A coin holding the top pop position, meaning no other certified example has ever achieved a higher grade for that specific date, mint mark, and error combination, occupies genuinely rarefied territory within the hobby. For dedicated set registry collectors, building complete, high-grade sets through the PCGS set registry or NGC registry, acquiring the finest known example of a particular variety becomes almost an obsession, and top pop coins routinely command significant premiums purely because of that status. The CAC sticker system plays a role here too. Coins that pass CAC's secondary review, earning that small green sticker indicating the coin is a strong, premium quality example for its grade, consistently outperform ungraded by CAC coins of the identical assigned grade when they hit the auction block. For a 1993 D error coin, having that extra layer of expert validation can make a meaningful difference in the final hammer price. It's also worth understanding how the PCGS CoinFacts and NGC Coin Explorer databases function, because they've become essential research tools for anyone chasing coins like this 1993 D quarter. Both platforms let collectors look up detailed historical auction results, high-resolution photos of top-graded examples, and rarity estimates for specific date, mint mark, and variety combinations. If you ever find a quarter you suspect might carry a genuine error, cross-referencing it against these databases, comparing your coin's characteristics against confirmed, certified examples, is one of the best first steps you can take before spending money on formal submission fees. NGC also runs an extensive dealer network and participates in NGC international submissions, meaning collectors outside the United States can access the same rigorous grading standards, which has helped fuel global interest in American error coins, including modest, unassuming pieces like the 1993 D quarter that might otherwise have stayed confined to a purely domestic market. Crossover events are another piece of this puzzle worth knowing about. These are special submission windows where a coin already graded by one service, say NGC, can be resubmitted to the other service, PCGS, to see if it crosses over and receives an equivalent or even higher grade under a different holder. Collectors sometimes pursue crossovers strategically, particularly for registry set purposes, since certain competitive sets only recognize coins graded by one specific service. For a rare, well-preserved 1993 D error quarter, a successful crossover into a higher grade can meaningfully increase both its registry set eligibility and its ultimate market value. I also want to touch on something called Secure Plus, a service PCGS offers that goes beyond a standard grade. Secure Plus involves a more rigorous examination process, including forensic-level imaging that creates a kind of digital fingerprint of the coin's surface useful for detecting if a coin has been altered, doctored, or swapped after certification. Coins that qualify for the plus designation, denoted with a small plus symbol after the grade, are considered to be at the high end of their assigned grade range, essentially a coin that's almost, but not quite, good enough to bump up to the next full grade level. For an already rare error coin, earning a plus designation on top of everything else is basically the icing on the cake. Auction history for significant 1993 D quarter errors has followed a pattern we're seeing across the entire error coin market: steadily climbing interest, driven largely by collectors who remember this era firsthand, combined with a shrinking supply of genuinely well-preserved examples as the decades pass. Every year, more of these coins get lost, spent, melted, or simply damaged beyond collectible condition, which means the surviving population of exceptional examples only gets smaller over time, even as demand from collectors continues to grow. Let's talk about the Denver Mint's role in all of this a bit more, because context genuinely matters here. Throughout the early 1990s, Denver was operating multiple high-speed coin presses simultaneously, all pushing out quarters, dimes, and nickels for circulation across a huge portion of the country. The dies used on these presses were subjected to extraordinary wear, and while the mint did rotate dies out of service on a regular schedule to manage that wear, the exact timing wasn't perfect. A die nearing the end of its usable life, showing early signs of cracking or wear, might still remain in service for thousands, even tens of thousands, of additional strikes before someone finally pulled it, meaning that die cracks and cuds, once they started forming, could actually appear on a surprisingly large batch of coins before the flawed die was finally retired. That's actually part of why die crack and cut errors, while individually striking to look at, aren't always as astronomically rare as some other error types, but the severity of the crack, and the overall condition of the coin it appears on, still dramatically affects value. Here's something else worth mentioning, the emotional side of this hobby, because I don't think we talk about it enough. For a lot of collectors, chasing coins like this isn't really about the money at all, or at least, not only about the money. There's something deeply satisfying about holding a small piece of accidental history in your hand, a tiny, physical record of a machine malfunctioning, a die cracking, a color failing, decades ago, captured forever in a single 2.5-inch disc of metal. Every error coin tells a story about the exact moment something went wrong on a factory floor most of us will never see. That's part of the magic that keeps people checking their change, year after year, even when the odds of finding something significant are genuinely low. Let's slow down for a moment and talk about the strike-through error, because it's another variety that occasionally turns up on 1993 D quarters, and it's one of the strangest looking mistakes you'll ever come across in this hobby. A strike-through happens when some kind of foreign object, a stray piece of grease, a sliver of metal debris, a scrap of cloth, even a loose thread from a worker's glove ends up sitting on top of the planchet at the exact moment the dies come crashing down to strike the coin. Whatever that object was gets partially or fully embossed into the coin's surface, leaving a strange, irregular impression that has no business being there. Sometimes the object stays stuck to the coin permanently, fused right into the design. Other times it falls away afterward, leaving behind a blank, textured void where the strike-through occurred. Either way, the result is a coin with an bizarre, almost otherworldly defect, a patch of missing detail, a strange texture, an impression that looks like it doesn't belong. Strike-throughs are chased by a very specific type of collector, people who specialize in what's sometimes called novelty errors, because the exact object that caused the strike-through is often impossible to identify with total certainty, which turns every single strike-through coin into its own little unsolved mystery. Was it a scrap of fabric? A wood chip? A fragment of a broken die? Nobody knows for sure, and that uncertainty is exactly what makes these coins so compelling to specific collectors willing to pay a premium for something genuinely one of a kind. I also want to spend a moment on the die cap error, sometimes called a brockage cap, because while true die caps are exceptionally uncommon on quarters, understanding how they happen helps explain the sheer mechanical chaos that can occur inside a coin press when something goes seriously wrong. Normally, after a coin is struck, it gets ejected cleanly from between the two dies, and the next blank planchet feeds into place. But every so often, a freshly struck coin fails to eject properly and instead sticks to the face of one of the dies. When the next planchet feeds into the press, it gets struck not against the normal die surface, but against the back of that stuck coin instead, which is now acting like an improvised, distorted extra die. The coin still stuck in the press, meanwhile, keeps absorbing strike after strike, gradually stretching, thinning, and cupping around the die itself, eventually forming a strange, bottle cap-shaped piece of metal called a die cap. Any subsequent coins struck against that cap pick up a weak, mirrored, distorted version of the design pressed into them, an error known as a brockage. It's an incredibly rare, almost accidental chain reaction, and when it does happen, it produces some of the strangest, most visually dramatic error coins in the entire hobby. I want to give you another practical tip here, specifically for spotting rotated die errors, because this one trips people up. Take any normal quarter you have on hand and flip it vertically top edge to bottom edge, like turning a page, while keeping your thumb pinned on the same spot. On a correctly oriented coin, the reverse design should appear right side up and properly aligned when you do this. Now, when you're checking a 1993 D quarter specifically for a rotated die error, do the exact same flip, and pay close attention to whether the eagle on the reverse appears tilted, sideways, or upside down compared to where it should be. Even a rotation of 15 or 20 degrees, while subtle, is something a trained eye or a careful comparison against a normal coin can absolutely catch. Members-only shows and specialty club events hosted by grading services and regional coin clubs have also played a quiet but important role in growing interest around coins exactly like this one. At these gatherings, collectors trade notes, compare finds, and perhaps most importantly for someone just starting out, get free, informal opinions from experienced hobbyists about coins they've found but aren't sure about. If you ever get serious about checking your own change on a regular basis, attending even one local coin show can completely change how you look at your pocket change forever. And listen, I know some of you watching this are thinking, there's no way I'd recognize a die crack or a rotated die if I saw one. But I promise you, it's more intuitive than it sounds. Once you've looked at even a handful of reference photos, your eye starts to pick up on things that look off almost automatically. A raised blob where there shouldn't be one. A coin that looks slightly larger or more spread out than its neighbors. A design that just doesn't sit right when you flip it the normal way. You don't need a numismatics degree. You just need patience, curiosity, and a willingness to actually look. I want to share one more story with you, because I think it really drives home how these coins survive undetected for so long. Picture a small-town laundromat, the kind with a row of coin-operated washers along the back wall, quarters clinking into the machine's coin box day after day, year after year, for decades. Now picture the owner of that laundromat, finally retiring after 30 years, emptying out an old metal coin box that had been collecting quarters since the early 1990s and had simply never been fully cashed out, just topped up and drawn down, over and over, with the oldest coins settling to the bottom, undisturbed, for years at a time. When that box finally got sorted, coin by coin, a 1993 D quarter with a bold, unmistakable broad strike turned up near the very bottom, spread wide, misshapen, completely unlike anything else in the box. It had probably been sitting in that same coin box, cycling in and out of use, for the better part of 30 years, completely unnoticed by thousands of customers who fed coins into that machine without a second glance. That's the thing about coin boxes, laundromats, vending machines, toll booths, arcade change machines, anywhere large volumes of quarters pass through human hands without close inspection. These are exactly the kinds of places where error coins can hide in plain sight for decades, cycling through commerce again and again, until finally, by pure chance, someone who actually knows what to look for happens to handle that exact coin at exactly the right moment. Let's also talk briefly about how the broader error coin market has evolved over the past several years, because understanding these trends helps explain why now, more than ever, might be the ideal time to start checking your own change. Online auction platforms and specialized numismatic marketplaces have made it dramatically easier for everyday collectors and casual coin owners to connect directly with serious error coin specialists, cutting out a lot of the friction that used to exist in this hobby. Where finding a buyer for an unusual error coin used to require tracking down a specialist dealer or attending an in-person coin show, today a well-documented error, properly photographed and certified, can reach a global audience of interested collectors within days. That increased accessibility has, in turn, driven up competition and prices for the best documented, most dramatic examples across nearly every date and denomination, including our 1993 D quarter. Before we move into our final coin of the day, I want to remind you one more time, what's coming next is, without exaggeration, the most dramatic coin story in today's entire video. I've been holding back the details on purpose, because I want you to experience the reveal the way it deserves to be experienced. So if you've made it this far, don't stop now. The best is still ahead of us. One more thing worth mentioning before we close out this coin: the difference between authentic mint errors and coins that have simply been damaged after leaving the mint. This distinction matters enormously, because a coin that got run over by a lawnmower, chewed up by a garbage disposal, or warped by heat from a house fire might look dramatic and unusual, but it holds essentially zero value to serious collectors, because that damage happened outside the minting process, after the coin was already finished and released into circulation. A true mint error, by contrast, happened during production, before the coin ever reached a human hand, before it ever touched a cash register or a pocket. That distinction is exactly why professional authentication matters so much. A trained grader, or an experienced error coin dealer, can typically tell the difference immediately, based on subtle characteristics like the direction of metal flow, the condition of the edges, and whether the design elements that are present remain sharp and fully struck, or show signs of post-mint alteration instead. If you ever find something you believe might be a genuine error, this is exactly why getting a second opinion from someone knowledgeable matters so much before assuming or dismissing its value. So, keep this in mind too. Value in this hobby. Last 1980 D Washington quarter. This is the coin that proves even pocket change can rewrite your life. Out of everything we've covered today, this is the one I've been saving for last, and by the time this video is over, you're going to understand exactly why. The 1980 D Washington quarter has produced some of the single most dramatic, most valuable error coins ever documented from the modern quarter series, and today, we're finally getting into the full story. Let's set the scene. 1980 sat right at the tail end of a turbulent decade for American coinage. The 1970s had seen the U.S. Mint wrestle with rising silver and copper prices, shifting metal compositions, and enormous public confusion about what coins were even made of anymore. By 1980, the clad quarter, copper-nickel bonded over a copper core, the same basic composition still used today, had been standard for well over a decade, and the Denver Mint was operating at an absolutely relentless pace, striking hundreds of millions of quarters to keep up with a growing, increasingly cash-reliant economy. High-volume production, aging equipment, and constant mechanical strain created exactly the kind of environment where dramatic errors could and did slip through. And here's the number I promised you. The most extraordinary, best documented 1980 D quarter errors, coins combining a major, undeniable minting mistake with exceptional surviving condition, have been documented selling at auction for figures reaching well into the 5 figures, representing the highest confirmed values of any coin we've discussed today. This is the grand finale for a reason. Out of everything in today's video, this is the coin with the most jaw-dropping documented sales, the most passionate collector following, and honestly, the most incredible discovery stories. So let's get into exactly what makes the 1980 D quarter capable of commanding numbers like that. The first error we need to talk about is one of the rarest, most dramatic categories in the entire hobby, the wrong planchet error. Here's how something this bizarre can even happen. The Denver Mint, remember, wasn't just striking quarters in 1980, it was simultaneously producing pennies, nickels, dimes, and quarters, often on the very same production floor, sometimes even using shared equipment and storage bins for blank planchets waiting to be struck. Under normal conditions, strict separation protocols keep each denomination's planchets completely isolated from one another. But mistakes happen. A stray dime planchet, smaller, thinner, made of a completely different metal composition than a quarter blank, can occasionally end up mixed into a bin of quarter planchets, either through human error during transport, or through a malfunction in the automated feeding system. When that wrong-sized, wrong composition planchet gets fed into a quarter press and struck with quarter dies, the result is one of the most visually shocking error coins imaginable, a coin with the full design of a Washington quarter, struck onto a blank that's simply too small to hold it. Parts of the design run right off the edge of the coin, cut off mid-image, because the dies were built to strike something larger than what they actually received. Wrong planchet errors are exceptionally rare, precisely because so many safeguards exist specifically to prevent them, which is exactly why, when a genuine, certified example surfaces, it commands attention and money far beyond almost any other error category. The second error type central to today's finale is the lamination flaw. This one happens at an even more fundamental level than most errors we've discussed, not during striking, but during the actual manufacturing of the metal strip the planchets are punched from. Coin metal is produced by bonding layers of different metals together under enormous heat and pressure. For a clad quarter, that's the copper-nickel outer layers bonded to the pure copper core. If that bonding process is imperfect, if impurities, trapped gas, or foreign material get caught between the layers during manufacturing, the metal strip develops a weakness, an internal separation that isn't always visible from the outside. When a planchet punched from that flawed strip gets struck into a coin, the layers can peel, flake, crack, or even fully separate over time, sometimes immediately visible as a strange, uneven, flaking texture on the coin's surface, and in more extreme cases, visible as a coin that's noticeably thinner in certain areas where an entire layer has separated and fallen away completely. Lamination flaws range from subtle surface blemishes that most people would mistake for simple damage, all the way up to dramatic, headline-worthy examples where a significant portion of the coin's surface has visibly peeled away, revealing the different metal layer underneath. The most extreme, well-documented lamination errors, the kind where the flaw is undeniable, dramatic, and clearly happened during the manufacturing process rather than through later damage, are exactly the kind of coins that end up in serious error coin auctions. And the third error we need to discuss for our grand finale coin is the partial collar error, sometimes called a railroad rim by collectors because of its distinctive appearance. Remember how we talked about the collar, that metal ring surrounding the planchet during striking, responsible for giving the coin its correct round shape and, on a quarter, its reeded edge? A partial collar error happens when that collar doesn't fully engage before the strike occurs. Maybe it's stuck part way, maybe it's misaligned, maybe it simply doesn't drop into position correctly. The result is a coin where part of the edge shows the correct reeded pattern from proper collar contact, while the rest of the edge flares outward, smooth and unreeded, exactly like the flanged wheel of a train car, hence the railroad rim nickname. It's an immediately recognizable, visually striking error, because the transition between the correctly collared portion and the flared, uncollared portion is often razor-sharp and completely unmistakable once you know what you're looking at. Before we move deeper into the grading side of things, there's one more error category worth mentioning here, because it occasionally overlaps with the multi-error coins we've been discussing, the multiple strike. This happens when a struck coin, instead of ejecting cleanly from the press after the first strike, somehow remains sitting between the dies and gets struck a second time, sometimes even a third or fourth time, often with the coin shifting slightly between each individual strike. The result is a coin showing overlapping, doubled, sometimes almost chaotic layers of design, images ghosting into one another at odd angles, with portions of Washington's portrait or the eagle reverse appearing to repeat across the coin's surface in a way that looks almost intentional, almost artistic, despite being a complete mechanical accident. Multiple strike errors are visually unforgettable, genuinely one of the most eye-catching categories in the entire error coin hobby, and when a coin exhibits a multiple strike alongside something like a partial collar or a wrong planchet, you're looking at a specimen that practically writes its own auction description. Now, when you consider the possibility of a 1980 D quarter combining even one of these dramatic errors with an exceptionally high surviving grade, you start to understand why collectors get so worked up about coins from this date. But every so often, and this is exactly the kind of scenario that fuels the biggest documented sales in this hobby, a single coin surfaces exhibiting characteristics of multiple overlapping mint mistakes simultaneously. A wrong planchet strike that also shows lamination separation. A partial collar error on a coin that also carries a doubled element in the design. These multi-error coins are the true unicorns of the error coin world, because the odds of several independent mechanical failures compounding on a single coin, at a single moment, are almost impossibly small. And when one of these multi-error coins also happens to survive in high mint state condition, certified and slabbed by a major grading service? That's when you start seeing the kind of headline-grabbing prices that make the news even outside of dedicated coin collecting circles. Let me tell you the story behind this coin, the kind of story that has genuinely happened in this hobby, and the kind of story that keeps millions of people checking their pocket change every single year. Picture an elderly man named Harold, a former bank teller who spent over 3 decades working behind a counter, handling cash and coins every single day of his working life. Throughout his career, Whenever an unusual-looking coin passed through his hands, he'd quietly set it aside instead of putting it back into circulation, not because he was a serious collector, but simply out of habit, out of a lifelong curiosity about the money passing through his fingers. When he finally passed away and his family began sorting through his modest estate, they found an old cigar box tucked inside a filing cabinet, filled with what looked like nothing more than a random assortment of odd, slightly damaged-looking coins. Most of the family assumed it was worthless, just an old man's harmless habit of hoarding weird pocket change. But his granddaughter, curious enough to do a little research before dismissing the box entirely, began photographing each coin and searching for anything that looked similar online. Buried among ordinary, unremarkable coins was a single 1980 D-quarter, one that looked strange in a way she couldn't quite explain, with a texture on part of its surface that seemed almost flaky, almost peeled. She had it examined by a professional grading service. It turned out to be a documented lamination error, dramatic and clearly mint-made, in a surprisingly well-preserved state of preservation. That single quarter, pulled from a box of coins the family had almost thrown away entirely, ended up selling to a specialist collector for a sum that fundamentally changed how the entire family thought about worthless old coins forever. That story right there, that's exactly why we make these videos. Because Harold wasn't a coin expert. He didn't have any special training. He just had a lifetime of quiet curiosity, and it turned out to be worth more than anyone in his family ever imagined. Let's talk about grading one more time, because for our grand finale coin, the grading story really is the whole ballgame. On the Sheldon scale, a 1980 D-quarter surviving in true gem mint state condition, MS65 and above, ideally reaching into the MS67, MS68, or in the rarest documented cases, even higher, represents a coin that's beaten some pretty steep odds. Quarters from this era were workhorses, meant to circulate hard, meant to get handled constantly, and the overwhelming majority did exactly that, picking up nicks, scratches, and dulled luster within just a few years of leaving the mint. A coin that somehow avoided all of that, combined with a documented, dramatic mint error, represents the intersection of two independently rare outcomes happening to PCGS and NGC population reports for 1980 D-quarters carrying major, certified errors remain remarkably thin, and for the rarest categories, true wrong planchet errors, dramatic multi-error specimens, population counts can sometimes be counted on one hand across both grading services combined. That kind of extreme scarcity is exactly what fuels top pop status, exactly what drives condition census rankings, and exactly what turns a routine PCGS set registry or NG. TrueView Photography, a premium imaging service offered by PCGS, deserves a mention here too, because for a coin this rare and this visually dramatic, high-resolution, professionally lit photography genuinely matters to the final sale price. A wrong planchet error or a dramatic lamination flaw needs to be seen clearly to be fully appreciated. Collectors bidding in online auctions, unable to physically hold the coin themselves, rely heavily on high-quality imagery to judge exactly how dramatic and well-preserved an error truly is. TrueView images, with their controlled lighting and exceptional clarity, have become something of an industry standard for exactly this reason, particularly for headline-grabbing error coins expected to draw serious bidding interest. The CAC sticker also plays an outsized role for coins in this category. Because multi-error, high-grade 1980 D-quarters are submitted so infrequently, even experienced CAC reviewers may only encounter a handful of comparable examples across their entire career. When CAC does approve a coin like this, confirming it's not just accurately graded, but a genuinely premium quality example within that grade, the sticker functions almost like a second layer of provenance, reassuring potential buyers that multiple independent experts have looked closely and reached the same conclusion about the coin's quality. It's also worth mentioning PCGS CoinFacts and the NGC Coin Explorer once more here, specifically because for ultra-rare error categories like wrong planchet strikes, these databases sometimes contain photographs and auction records for literally every single certified example known to exist. When you're dealing with a population that small, every recorded sale becomes a meaningful data point, closely studied by serious collectors trying to understand exactly how rare, and exactly how valuable, a given error type truly is. A new discovery entering that database, a coin nobody had previously documented, can genuinely shift the market's understanding of how many examples might still be out there, waiting to be found. Cameo and Ultra Cameo designations, typically associated with proof coins, occasionally come into play with business strike quarters too, when unusually fresh dies produce a frosted, contrasting effect between the raised design elements and the surrounding fields, though this is admittedly rarer on circulation strike coins like our 1980 D quarter compared to official proof issues. Still, when it does occur, particularly on a coin that also carries a major mint error, it adds yet another layer of desirability that serious collectors take note of. I want to spend a little extra time here talking about exactly why multi-error, high-grade coins from this era command such extraordinary prices, because I think it's genuinely one of the most fascinating dynamics in the entire hobby. Think about it from a pure probability standpoint. The Denver Mint, in 1980, was striking coins by the hundreds of millions. The overwhelming majority of those coins were completely normal, struck correctly, on the right planchet, with properly aligned dies and a properly engaged collar. For a single error to occur, say, a lamination flaw already required something to go wrong at the metal manufacturing stage, a genuinely uncommon occurrence given the mint's quality control processes. For that same coin to also exhibit a partial collar error would require an entirely separate, independent mechanical failure to occur during the striking process itself, completely unrelated to the lamination issue. The odds of both of these independent failures happening to the same physical coin, and then that same coin somehow avoiding decades of circulation were well enough to survive in a collectible grade, are almost impossible to calculate with any real precision, which is exactly why coins meeting all of these criteria simultaneously are so vanishingly rare, and exactly why they command such extraordinary premiums when they do surface. Let's also talk about how error coin collecting has genuinely gone mainstream over the past several years, because I think this context helps explain why 1980 D quarters, specifically, have become such a hot topic in recent auction cycles. Social media, video platforms just like this one, and increased media coverage of shocking, viral coin discoveries have introduced an entirely new generation of casual collectors to a hobby that used to feel niche, almost inaccessible, reserved for dedicated specialists with decades of experience. Today, ordinary people with zero formal numismatic training, are checking bankrolls, digging through inherited coin collections, and searching online auction listings, all chasing the exact kind of life-changing discovery we've been talking about throughout this entire video. That surge in interest has driven demand for well-documented, dramatically visual errors sky high, precisely because these are the coins that translate best to an audience that might not understand the finer technical points of numismatics, but can absolutely appreciate a coin that looks genuinely, unmistakably wrong. Let's also talk about how error coin collecting has genuinely gone mainstream over the past several years, because I think this context helps explain why 1980 D quarters, specifically, have become such a hot topic in recent auction cycles. Social media, video platforms just like this one, and increased media coverage of shocking, viral coin discoveries have introduced an entirely new generation of casual collectors to a hobby that used to feel niche, almost inaccessible, reserved for dedicated specialists with decades of experience. Today, ordinary people with zero formal numismatic training, are checking bankrolls, digging through inherited coin collections, and searching online auction listings, all chasing the exact kind of life-changing discovery we've been talking about throughout this entire video. That surge in interest has driven demand for well-documented, dramatically visual errors sky high, precisely because these are the coins that translate best to an audience that might not understand the finer technical points of numismatics, but can absolutely appreciate a coin that looks genuinely, unmistakably wrong. Let me also walk you through what actually happens once a coin like this gets discovered and confirmed as genuine, because the process itself is part of what makes this hobby so exciting. First, the coin gets carefully packaged, never cleaned, never polished, handled only by the edges to avoid transferring oils from bare skin onto the surface, and submitted to a grading service along with detailed notes about where and how it was found. Graders examine the coin under strong magnification, checking for the telltale signs that distinguish a genuine mint error from post-mint damage, things like the direction of metal displacement, the condition of the reading or lack thereof, and whether the error is consistent with known minting processes from that specific year in mint facility. Once authenticated, the coin gets assigned a numerical grade, sealed inside a tamper-evident holder, and officially entered into that grading service's population report, at which point it becomes a permanent, documented part of numismatic history, findable by researchers and collectors for as long as the hobby exists. From there, the coin typically heads to auction, or specialized error coin dealers, registry set collectors, and sometimes even institutional buyers compete for the chance to own it. The entire process, from initial discovery to final sale, can take anywhere from a few weeks to several months, depending on submission backlogs and auction scheduling, but for a coin this rare, collectors are generally more than willing to wait. I want to give you one final, practical piece of advice before we close out today's video, advice that applies not just to 1980 D quarters, but to every single coin we've discussed. If you ever find something you believe might be a genuine mint error, resist the urge to immediately sell it to the first buyer who offers you money. Take your time. Get a professional opinion, ideally from a grading service or a reputable, established coin dealer with a verifiable track record. Errors like the ones we've discussed today, wrong planchets, lamination flaws, partial collars, double dies, off-centers, cuds, rotated dies, strike-throughs, clipped planchets, can sometimes be difficult even for experienced eyes to fully authenticate without proper examination, and getting that authentication before you sell protects you from potentially giving away a genuinely valuable coin for far less than it's actually worth. And here's something else worth remembering: not every valuable coin needs to carry a dramatic, headline-worthy error to be worth checking out. Sometimes it's simply about exceptional condition. A perfectly preserved 1980 D quarter with zero errors whatsoever, but graded at the very top of the population report, can still command a meaningful premium over a typical circulated example, purely because so few coins from this era survived in that kind of pristine condition. Rarity, remember, comes in more than one flavor. Sometimes it's about a dramatic mistake, and sometimes it's simply about a coin that somehow escaped the wear and tear that claimed almost every other example from its production run. And here's something else worth remembering: not every valuable coin needs to carry a dramatic, headline-worthy error to be worth checking out. Sometimes it's simply about exceptional condition. A perfectly preserved 1980 D quarter with zero errors whatsoever, but graded at the very top of the population report, can still command a meaningful premium over a typical circulated example, purely because so few coins from this era survived in that kind of pristine condition. Rarity, remember, comes in more than one flavor. Sometimes it's about a dramatic mistake, and sometimes it's simply about a coin that somehow escaped the wear and tear that claimed almost every other example from its production run. I also want to leave you with a bit of perspective on why 1980 specifically produced so many of these documented multi-era rarities, compared to some other years. The early 1980s marked a period of significant transition for the Denver Mint's equipment. Older presses nearing the end of their operational lifespan were still running alongside newer machinery being gradually phased in, creating exactly the kind of mixed, imperfect production environment where mechanical inconsistencies were more likely to occur. Add to that the sheer production volume required to meet the country's growing demand for circulating coinage, and you have a genuine perfect storm of conditions: aging equipment, high volume output, and constant mechanical strain, all combining to make 1980 D quarters a genuinely fertile hunting ground for the kinds of dramatic errors we've spent this entire segment discussing. So here we are, 3 coins, 3 completely different stories, 3 reminders that the change sitting in your pocket, your car's cup holder, your kid's piggy bank, or that old jar collecting dust on top of the refrigerator might be worth infinitely more than its face value. From the 1998 D quarter with its double dies and dramatic off-center strikes, to the 1993 D quarter with its die cracks, broad strikes, and rotated reverses, all the way to today's grand finale, this incredible 1980 D quarter, capable of combining wrong planchets, lamination flaws, and partial collar errors into some of the most valuable modern quarter discoveries ever documented. The message running through every single one of these stories is exactly the same. Ordinary objects can hide extraordinary value. You just have to be willing to actually look. I want you to do something for me right now, before you close this video. Go find your spare change. It doesn't matter if it's a single quarter sitting on your nightstand or an entire forgotten roll from the bank. Take 5 minutes. Check the dates. Check the mint marks. Look for anything that seems even slightly off, a doubled letter, a raised blob where there shouldn't be one, an edge that doesn't look quite round, a texture that seems flaky or uneven, a design element that seems to be missing or cut off. You might find nothing. Statistically, you probably will find nothing. But every single story we told you today started with somebody who almost didn't bother checking and did anyway. Remember Diane, sorting through her father's old cigar box? Remember Raymond, nearly dumping 30 years of loose change straight into a counting machine? Remember Harold, quietly setting aside weird coins for decades without ever knowing exactly what he was holding? None of them were experts. None of them had special training. They just paid attention, just once, at exactly the right moment, and it changed everything. That's it for today's deep dive into hidden coin value. If this video opened your eyes to just how much history and potential fortune might be hiding in your everyday pocket change, make sure you're subscribed, because we cover stories exactly like this one all the time, and trust me, there are plenty more incredible discoveries still waiting to be told, still sitting out there in coin jars, cigar boxes, and forgotten bankrolls across the entire country. Thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. Until next time, keep checking your change, because you truly never know what you might find.